It's July 5, 2025, and Congress just sent President Trump his big, beautiful bill. Let's break down what's inside before the market does. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're unpacking, well, a truly monumental piece of legislation. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, officially H.R. 1.
Right, and this isn't just, another run-of-the-mill bill. It's being framed as a signature moment, signed into law by President Trump yesterday, actually, July 4th, 2025.
July 4th. And signature really feels like the right word, doesn't it? The signing ceremony itself sounds like it was quite the production.
Oh, absolutely. A spectacle is probably the word.
Yeah.
Held right there on the south lawn of the White House. And from all accounts, it really took on the feel of a full-blown Trump political rally. Very celebratory.
More than just a signing then. I heard there was quite a display overhead, too.
Yeah, quite dramatic. Military jets, including stealth bombers, fighter jets, doing these big flyovers, a real patriotic show of force for, signing a piece of paper.
Interesting choice. And who was actually there on the ground?
Hundreds of supporters, apparently very enthusiastic. Plus, the usual White House aides, members of Congress, military families were there too. It felt designed to be this big public statement.
Okay, so the ceremony was a statement, but let's look at the bill's journey. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing through Congress, was it?
Mm-hmm.
It passed the Republican-controlled House, but just barely.
Barely is right. The vote was incredibly tight. 218 to 214.
Wow.
Yeah, that razor-thin margin. It just highlights how divisive this whole thing was, a real legislative brawl to get it through.
And President Trump is already calling it the signature legislation of his second term. That's a pretty big claim right out of the gate.
It is. Suggests he really sees this as defining his, economic and maybe even social policy agenda from here on out, setting the stage.
But that bold claim, it stands in pretty stark contrast to the opposition, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Democratic response was fierce.
Fierce is an understatement. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, he spoke against it for, get this, 8 hours and 46 minutes.
8 hours, nearly 9.
Almost 9 hours. Yeah. I mean, that's not just a protest speech, that's a marathon. Shows just how fundamental the disagreement was, a real act of legislative defiance.
Definitely more than just theatrics. So what were the core objections driving that level of opposition?
Well, broadly, Democrats called it a giveaway to the wealthy. They argued the benefits really skewed towards the top earners.
Okay, that's a common theme. Anything else?
They also warned pretty strongly that it would, and I'm quoting here, strip low-income Americans of federally backed health insurance and food aid benefits. So painting a picture of really two very different potential futures depending on this bill.
Okay, so huge debate, narrow passage. Now, let's talk scale. It's described as a massive package of tax and spending cuts.
Yeah.
How massive are we actually talking?
Well, the sheer size is something, we don't have an exact page count confirmed, but looking at the table of contents, it looks like it's around 900 pages long.
900 pages. That's dense.
Incredibly dense, yeah. Reshaping huge parts of federal policy tucked away in there.
And President Trump himself made some pretty sweeping claims about what's in those pages.
He did. He claimed it included, and again, these are his words, the biggest tax cut, the biggest spending cut, the largest border security investment in American history.
Biggest ever. Those are monumental promises. Sets incredibly high expectations.
Absolutely. Huge expectations for the long-term effects.
But okay, let's get real. What are the actual fiscal numbers looking like? What does this mean for the national finances, especially with those kinds of claims?
Right. Well, a nonpartisan analysis projects this bill will add more than $3 trillion to the national debt.
$3 trillion with a T.
$3 trillion. Yeah. Over the standard forecast period. It's a staggering figure, pushes our debt load much, much higher. A seismic shift, really, not just a small increase.
And just for context, where are we starting from? What's the current national debt?
We're already at $36.2 trillion.
$36.2 trillion.
Yeah. So adding another $3 trillion on top of that, it means an even bigger chunk of future budgets just goes to paying interest. It really compounds the challenge.
And the bill itself addresses this almost preemptively. I heard it actually changes the debt limit.
It does explicitly. Section 72,001. It increases the public debt limitation by another $5 trillion.
$5 trillion. So $3 trillion in projected debt, but they're raising the ceiling by $5 trillion.
Exactly. It's not just spending, it's redefining our borrowing capacity, almost like giving a green light for, even more debt down the road if needed. A huge financial undertaking.
All right, the stage is set, the bill is signed. Now let's peel back the layers, starting with the core of the financial changes. Title VII, Finance. This seems to be the engine room for these tax cuts and reforms.
Definitely the engine room. And for individuals, Mark, there's some really key changes designed to provide, well, pretty significant relief on paper.
Okay, like what? What's the headline change for most people?
The standard deduction, that's permanently increased, starting from 2025, which is, a major lasting change compared to some temporary fixes we've seen before.
Permanently increased. Okay, what are the new numbers?
For joint filers, it jumps up to $23,625.
$23,625.
And for single filers, it's $15,750.
$15,750. So that means a bigger chunk of income is tax-free for millions of people.
Right.
An ongoing boost.
Exactly. A substantial ongoing boost to disposable income for many households.
Okay. What about families? Any changes to things like the child tax credit?
Yep. The child tax credit gets extended and enhanced, building on what was there before. So the aim is more relief for families, potentially putting more cash directly into parents' pockets.
And I noticed something about estate and gift taxes, too. Always a bit controversial.
Right. The exemption amounts for both estate and gift taxes, they're permanently increased and enhanced as well. So this is a pretty big deal for wealth transfer planning. It reduces the tax hit on larger estates and gifts, indefinitely.
Prominently. Okay. Now, there's also this specific item called a temporary senior deduction. Is that new? Aimed at older Americans.
It is new. While personal exemptions are generally gone in this bill, they kept this specific temporary senior deduction. It's targeted relief for seniors. Could boost their income a bit.
But temporary is the key word there.
Key word is temporary, yes. Important to remember that.
And what about the SALT deduction limit? The state and local tax deduction, that's been a huge issue, especially in higher tax states.
Ah, yes, SALT. The limit is modified. It's a crucial, but again, temporary reprieve. For 2025, the limit goes up from $10,000 to $40,000.
$40,000, that's a big jump from 10.
A substantial increase, yeah. A big relief for people in those high tax states who really felt the pinch of that $10,000 cap.
But it's not a permanent fix or a full repeal, is it? There's a catch.
Definitely a catch. It's not permanent. This new $40,000 limit, it starts phasing down by 30% for folks with modified adjusted gross incomes over $500,000.
Okay, phase down above $500K.
Right. And then critically, it snaps right back to $10,000 for tax years starting after 2029.
So just a few years of relief, then back to the status quo.
Exactly. A temporary bump for some, designed to ease the pressure for a bit, but not a long-term structural change to SALT.
Okay. Now let's dig into some of those presidential priorities on the tax side. Sounds like some specific campaign promises made it directly into the bill, like no tax on tips.
Absolutely. The bill rolls out several new deductions aimed at very specific types of income. No tax on tips is one of the big ones everyone's talking about. Section 7201.
So what does it actually do?
It creates a brand new deduction specifically for qualified cash tips, allows service workers to deduct up to $25,000 of that tip income.
$25,000 untaxed. That's significant for servers, bartenders. But are there income limits? Does everyone get it?
No, there are limits. This deduction starts to phase out if your adjusted gross income goes over $150,000 or $300,000 if you're filing jointly.
Okay, so aimed at middle-income earners in those service jobs.
Seems to be the target, yeah. Could potentially boost spending for those folks.
And there's a similar one for overtime pay, right? And a direct appeal.
You got it. No tax on overtime. Section 7202. Another new deduction. The max deduction here for qualified overtime pay is $12,500.
Full five.
Or double that, $25,000 for joint returns. So, maybe an incentive to work more hours.
Maybe. Does it have the same income phase out as the tips one?
It does. Same thresholds. Phases out above $150K or $300K for joint filers. So again, keeping the benefit focused on that middle income bracket.
Okay. And one more specific one, no tax on car loan interest. That sounds very targeted.
Yeah, it really does. Section 7203 allows a deduction for interest paid on certain passenger vehicle loans. A new, very specific tax break, maybe trying to juice the auto industry or just lower household transport costs a bit.
Interesting. Then there's this thing that really jumped out at me called Trump accounts. What on earth are those? A new kind of investment account.
They are indeed something new. Section 7204 establishes the Trump Accounts and Contribution Pilot Program. Basically, they're treated kind of like traditional IRAs, but with some very specific rules.
Specific rules, like what kind of investments can go in them? Is it broad?
No, not broad at all. They're designed only for eligible investments, and those have to be mutual funds or ETFs that track a qualified index.
A qualified index, like the S&P 500.
Exactly like the S&P 500. That's the example they give. Plus, these funds can't use leverage, and their annual fees have to be super low, no more than 0.1%.
0.1% fee. So low-cost, broad market index funds, basically.
But that seems to be the idea, pushing towards low-cost, diversified investing.
And who are these for? What are the contribution limits?
Contributions are capped at $5,000 a year, but only for beneficiaries under age 18.
Under 18. So these are meant for kids, like a saving starter.
Looks like it.
Okay.
Very clearly geared towards youth savings. And there's even a pilot program mentioned for a one-time $1,000 contribution per eligible child, like a little seed money from the government.
$1,000 to start.
Yeah.
And can employers chip in?
Yes, they can. Employer contributions up to $2,500 per employee are excluded from that employee's gross income. And that $2,500 adjusts for inflation after 2027.
Huh. Interesting incentive for businesses to contribute to employee savings. Could maybe boost financial literacy, too.
Potentially. Get more people involved in the market early.
Okay, let's pivot now to the spending side of this massive bill. It looks like, well, huge boost for defense and border security, very much aligning with the president's key platforms.
Monumental increases for both, Mark. Absolutely. Title II outlines just enormous enhancements for the Department of Defense, all across the board, really.
Okay, break that down. Where's the money going within DoD?
Well, they're putting a lot into military personnel quality of life initiatives, seems to be a focus.
Like what specifically?
Yeah.
Barracks. Housing.
Exactly. $230.5 million just for the Marine Corps Barracks 2030 initiative, modernizing living conditions.
Okay.
Plus another $1 billion with a B for sustainment, restoration, modernization of unaccompanied housing. Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, trying to ensure decent living standards.
$1 billion for housing.
Yeah.
And what about health care for military families? Always a big concern.
$2 billion appropriated for the Defense Health Program, bolstering medical care.
$2 billion.
And another $2.9 billion to supplement the basic allowance for housing BAH, directly tackling cost of living issues off base. Oh, and $50 million for bonuses and incentive pays, trying to help recruitment, retention.
Okay, so that covers personnel well-being. But what about the hardware? The advanced military tech? This bill seems heavy on that too.
Very heavy. Integrated air and missile defense gets massive funding, shows a real strategic focus on future threats. We're talking $5.6 billion for space-based and boost phase intercept capabilities.
$5.6 billion for missile defense tech. Pushing the envelope there.
Definitely. And even more for military space-based sensors. Another $7.2 billion for those.
$7.2 billion just for space sensors. Wow. That's a huge bet on space as a defense domain.
Massive investment. Highlights how crucial orbital capabilities are becoming for intelligence, for strategy.
The bill also seems really focused on munitions and shoring up the defense supply chain. Why such a big push there now?
Yeah, that's critical, especially with everything going on globally. Lots of money for missile development, production, integration.
Like specific missile types.
Yep. $400 million for Navy and Air Force long-range anti-ship missiles. Another $490 million for long-range air-to-surface missiles. Basically, replenishing and modernizing the arsenal.
Okay, makes sense. And beyond the missiles themselves, what about the factories and materials needed to build them?
Good point. There's $3.3 billion for industrial base fund grants and purchase commitments to strengthen domestic manufacturing.
$3.3 billion for the industrial base.
And $5 billion, another big number for investments in critical mineral supply chains, trying to reduce reliance on foreign sources for those essential materials.
Right. Air superiority also gets a lot of attention, specific planes mentioned.
Absolutely. $3.15 billion to ramp up production of the F-15EX aircraft.
Okay, more F-15s.
And interestingly, $361 million specifically to prevent the retirement of F-22 aircraft, keeping those advanced stealth fighters in the air.
Keeping the F-22s flying. And what about next-gen stuff like drones or AI planes?
Yep. $678 million to accelerate the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program. That's the push towards unmanned aircraft flying alongside piloted ones. A big leap in air power tech.
Okay, massive defense spending. Now let's shift to the other big spending priority. Border security. This was central to the president's campaign. And the funding seems to reflect that.
It really does. Title IX lays out huge appropriations for Homeland Security, an unprecedented level of funding for border enforcement, really. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, gets a massive boost across the board.
Okay, how massive? What are the numbers for CBP staffing?
$4.1 billion just for hiring and training more Border Patrol agents, Office of Field Operations officers, and Air and Marine agents.
$4.1 billion for personnel.
Plus another $2.05 billion specifically for recruitment, performance, and retention bonuses for them, trying to really build up that frontline workforce.
Huge investment in people. What about the tools and infrastructure they need? Vehicles? Buildings?
Yep. $855 million for vehicle repair and acquisition, making sure agents have transport, and then $5 billion, another $5 billion for facility lease, acquisition, construction, or improvement, new checkpoints, better facilities.
$5 billion for border infrastructure. And what about technology? Surveillance, biometrics.
It addresses that too. Funds allocated for tech upgrades, including that biometric entry and exit system they've talked about.
Right.
Also money for initial screenings of unaccompanied children, and specifically to combat drug trafficking, especially fentanyl, across all borders. So it's personnel, infrastructure, and tech. A comprehensive approach.
Okay. So beyond defense and the border, what about other major sectors? Energy, agriculture. How do they fare in this bill?
They also see some really significant shifts, very much aligning with the administration's stated goals. Title V on energy and resource extraction. It mandates the immediate resumption of quarterly onshore oil and gas lease sales.
Immediate resumption. So more domestic drilling permits, basically.
Exactly. The Interior Secretary has to conduct at least 4 sales a year in states like Wyoming, New Mexico, Alaska, and they have to offer at least 50% of the nominated parcels, ensuring a steady flow of new drilling opportunities.
And offshore. Is the Gulf getting more leasing too?
Oh, yeah. Big time. The bill mandates at least 30 region-wide lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico by 2040, offering at least 80 million acres per sale.
80 million acres per sale.
80 million. And up in Alaska's Cook Inlet, at least 6 sales between 2026 and 2032, offering 1 million acres each time. It's a massive, massive push for more fossil fuel production.
So really doubling down on oil and gas extraction, reversing some previous trends?
Absolutely. It also restores the oil and gas leasing program in the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska and PRA. Requires at least 5 lease sales there by 2035, each offering over 4 million acres. It effectively unwinds, quite a bit of recent energy policy in one go.
Okay. Turning to agriculture now, Title I. What's in there for farmers? New support, policy changes.
Agriculture sees some key changes. It includes some rescissions cuts to funding for forestry programs, redirecting some money away from certain conservation efforts.
Okay, some cuts there. What about the core farm support, like commodity programs, crop prices?
Those are updated. It sets new reference prices for key crops. Wheat at $6.35 a bushel, corn at $4.10, soybeans at $10 flat.
So new price floors, providing a safety net.
Right, a measure of security for farmers growing those crops.
Anything else? Changes to land eligibility for programs?
Yes, the bill allows for an additional 30 million base acres for eligible farms, expanding the reach of federal farm support. And it extends the main agriculture risk coverage programs through 2031, giving farmers some longer-term predictability.
Okay, so we've covered the tax cuts and the new spending. But this bill isn't just about adding things. It also makes significant cuts, rescissions from existing programs. This seems like a crucial part of the spending cuts the president mentioned.
That's absolutely right, Mark. This is the other side of the coin. Several sectors face really substantial reductions, particularly environment, healthcare, and higher education. And these aren't just small trims. Some are outright repeals of major programs.
Let's start with the environment then, Title VI. What's the biggest impact on green initiatives? Seems like a prime target.
It was a major target. The environmental sector faces massive funding cuts, largely clawing back money from the Inflation Reduction Act. The bill completely repeals the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund.
Repeal it entirely.
Entirely gone. That's a huge blow to climate investments. It was a key mechanism for funding clean energy projects, climate resilience. Poof.
Wow. Yeah, that's significant. What else is getting cut in the environmental space?
Well, it takes back unspent money for clean, heavy-duty vehicles, so likely fewer electric trucks and buses getting funded. It removes funding for environmental enforcement tech, for corporate greenhouse gas reporting, and for making EPA reviews more efficient.
Right, so less enforcement, less data, slower reviews.
Seems to be the direction. Plus, funding for low-carbon materials for federal buildings, also rescinded. It's a really broad withdrawal of federal support for pretty much anything green.
A comprehensive rollback.
Okay.
Now, healthcare, specifically Medicaid, under Subtitle B of Title VII. This affects millions of low-income Americans. What changes there?
Medicaid sees several really crucial and potentially quite controversial changes. First, there's a moratorium, a freeze on implementing new rules about staffing standards in long-term care facilities. That freeze lasts until September 30th, 2034.
2034, that's a long time. What's the implication?
It removes a key potential protection for patients regarding staffing levels. Could definitely lead to quality of care concerns down the road. Puts providers in a tough spot, too.
Okay, and what about eligibility? Who can actually get Medicaid? Are the rules getting tighter?
Yes, new requirements for eligibility redeterminations. States will have to recheck eligibility every 6 months for certain groups, starting in early 2027.
Every 6 months. That's frequent.
Much more frequent than before. It could easily lead to people losing coverage just due to paperwork issues or missing deadlines, a higher administrative burden.
And the changes related to alien Medicaid eligibility, that sounds sensitive.
It is. Starting October 1st, 2026, the bill generally restricts Medicaid payments to only citizens, lawful permanent residents, Cuban and Haitian entrants, or residents under the Compact of Free Association.
So a much narrower group eligible for federally funded Medicaid.
Significantly narrower. This will have a big impact on immigrant communities and the hospitals and clinics that serve them.
Any other changes affecting providers or how states fund their Medicaid programs? Seems like the funding itself might be squeezed.
Yes, there are revisions to how states can use provider taxes that could impact state revenue used to draw down federal matching funds. And there are new limits on state-directed payments, capping them at 100% of the Medicare rate for states that expanded Medicaid and 110% for those that didn't.
Which could mean less federal money overall.
Could mean less federal matching money, yes. Putting a squeeze on state budgets, potentially forcing cuts to services or provider payments, or states have to find the money elsewhere.
Okay. Shifting to higher education now, Title VIII. Student debt is such a massive issue. What are the big changes here for students in colleges?
This title brings some really significant reforms. Maybe restructuring is a better word. One of the biggest. It terminates federal direct PLUS loans for graduate and professional students, and also for parent borrowers.
Terminates PLUS loans for grad students and parents. That's huge. How will they finance higher ed?
That's the question. It's a major shift in how many people pay for advanced degrees or help their kids with undergrad. Could really impact enrollment, especially in graduate programs.
Okay, that's a big one. What about repaying loans? Any changes to repayment plans?
Big changes there, too. The bill repeals most of the existing income-contingent repayment plans.
Repeals most income-driven plans.
Most of them, yes. Which drastically alters the options for borrowers, especially those whose income isn't stable. Could make it much harder to manage debt long-term.
And what about safety nets? Like deferments or forbearance if someone loses their job or hits hard times?
Those are being tightened significantly. Unemployment and economic hardship deferments. They sunset, they go away for loans made on or after July 1st, 2027.
So new borrowers won't have those options.
Right. And forbearance on those new loans, it's limited to just 9 months total within any 24-month period. Much less flexibility for future borrowers facing difficulties.
Wow. Okay. And Pell Grants. Critical for low-income students. Any changes there?
Yes. The bill makes students ineligible for Pell Grants if their student aid index, the SAI, is equal to or higher than twice the maximum Pell Grant amount. That starts July 1st, 2026.
So some students who might get a partial Pell Grant now could lose it entirely.
Exactly. Could impact access for thousands of students who fall into that middle ground of need.
Are there any exemptions or reliefs in the financial aid calculations?
There is one notable one. It exempts certain assets from the calculations. Specifically, family farms and small businesses with 100 employees or fewer.
Ah, okay. So the value of the family farm or small business won't count against aid eligibility.
Right. Designed to help those families access aid without penalizing them for owning a core business asset.
Okay. Finally, let's touch on unemployment benefits. I heard there's a specific change targeting high earners.
That's correct. Subtitle D of Title VII. It prohibits using federal funds for unemployment benefits for anyone whose wages during their base period were $1 million or more.
$1 million or more in wages. You can't get federal unemployment.
That's the rule now, yes. A very specific cut, clearly aimed at the highest earners. More of a statement, perhaps, than a major budget saver, but it's in there.
Okay, so with a bill that's huge, massive tax cuts, big spending shifts, major debt implications, how are the markets reacting? Or maybe how are they expected to react as this sinks in?
Well, as we hinted at the top, that projected $3 trillion deficit add-on, that alone is enough to make markets jittery. We're definitely watching for volatility.
Right. Specifically, what might we see in things like futures, the dollar, bond yields?
Futures could be all over the place initially. Immediate jitters, maybe some sector-specific rallies depending on who traders think wins or loses. The US dollar, could go either way. Maybe strengthens on perceived confidence, maybe weakens on long-term debt worries, inflation fears.
And bond yields, especially treasuries, with government needing to borrow so much more.
Yeah, bond yields, particularly on the shorter and short duration T-notes, they're likely to climb. The market has to price in that potential inflation from all this spending and tax cutting, plus just the sheer volume of new debt hitting the market.
So higher borrowing costs for the government potentially bleeding into other rates.
Potentially. And, it seems we've finally found a bill that might be beautiful enough to tank two markets at once.
Let's hope not quite. Okay, let's talk clear beneficiaries. Who are the winners in this new landscape shaped by the big, beautiful bill?
Well, the defense contractors are probably popping champagne. They're the most obvious winners, billions flowing their way.
Like the companies making those F-15EX jets you mentioned.
Exactly. With $3.15 billion allocated just to increase production of those, that's a direct pipeline of new contracts for the manufacturers involved.
And the ones working on those advanced missile defense systems or space tech?
Absolutely. Companies in space-based interceptors, boost phase capabilities, they're looking at $5.6 billion in funding. Huge growth potential. Missile manufacturers too, hundreds of millions, even billions for developing and producing things like those long-range anti-ship and air-to-surface missiles.
Okay, defense is a clear winner. What about border security firms? That funding was massive too.
Another clear winner. Companies providing personnel, vehicles, tech for CBP. They are set for a boom. That $5 billion for new facilities and checkpoints, plus the $855 million for vehicles. That means huge contracts for construction, equipment suppliers.
And the tech side, surveillance, biometrics.
Definitely. Tech firms specializing in surveillance, biometric systems, drug detection tech, they're going to see a surge in demand and new government contracts. Direct flow of funds to that specific niche.
Right. And the oil gas industry. They must be pretty happy with those energy provisions.
Oh, ecstatic, I'd imagine. They're definite winners. The mandate to immediately resume lease sales onshore and offshore, that's huge.
Offering up millions and millions of new acres.
Millions of acres in the Gulf, in Alaska, onshore. It opens up vast new production opportunities, potentially locking things in for decades.
Didn't you mention something about royalty rates helping them too?
Correct. The repeal of some previous higher royalty rates directly boosts their bottom line, makes extraction potentially more profitable right away, a big financial incentive.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned senior consumer staples earlier, tied to that tax deduction. How do they benefit indirectly?
Right. It's indirect, but potentially significant. That temporary $6,000 senior deduction, it could mean more disposable income for seniors.
Which they might spend on. What?
Goods and services they tend to consume heavily. Think pharmaceuticals, maybe certain healthcare services, travel, specific retail segments. So companies focused on that senior market might see a sales bump, a ripple effect.
Okay. Now for the other side. Who's feeling the squeeze? Who are the immediate losers facing cutbacks or challenges from this bill?
Well, first up, Medicaid providers. They face some really significant headwinds. That moratorium on new staffing standards until 2034, that's a long time to potentially operate without those updated patient protections. Could create quality concerns.
And the tighter eligibility rules. Fewer patients means less revenue, right?
Exactly. Stricter redeterminations every 6 months, plus the restrictions on alien eligibility. That likely means fewer eligible patients walking through their doors, which directly hits their revenue, especially for providers serving vulnerable populations. Could lead to service cuts or even closures.
And the changes to how states get funding for Medicaid. That sounds like another pressure point.
It is. Changes to provider tax rules and those caps on state-directed payments. They could reduce the overall pot of money state revenue or federal matching funds available for Medicaid services. Less money in the system puts pressure on everyone. States, providers, patients.
Okay. The environmental and clean energy sector also seems to take a very direct hit, almost a policy reversal.
A huge reversal. The outright repeal of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a major blow. That fund was central to seeding a lot of green tech development and deployment.
And other green programs got cut too, right?
Right.
Not just that fund.
Right. Taking back money for clean, heavy-duty vehicles, cutting funds for EPA reviews, environmental enforcement tech, low-carbon federal buildings. It basically pulls the rug out from under a lot of federal support and incentives for green initiatives, a big setback for that sector.
Okay. And higher education. Colleges, loan servicers. With those big changes to student loans and Pell Grants.
They definitely need to adapt quickly. Terminating those graduate and parent PLUS loans, that could seriously impact funding for universities, especially graduate programs that rely heavily on that tuition revenue stream.
And for students trying to repay loans, the options seem to be narrowing significantly.
Very significantly. Eliminating most income-contingent repayment plans makes managing debt much harder for borrowers with fluctuating incomes.
Yeah.
And the new, tighter limits on deferments and forbearance, plus changes to Pell Grant eligibility, it all points towards potentially reduced access and affordability for some startups.
Okay. With all these massive shifts, the tax cuts, the spending, the huge debt increase, what's the chatter from Fed watchers? What's the Federal Reserve likely thinking about inflation risk?
Well, that $3 trillion added to the debt, that's the big red flag for inflation. Such a large fiscal expansion combined with broad tax cuts. It could inject a lot of demand into the economy, potentially overheating things.
So the Fed will be watching price stability very, very closely.
Absolutely. This bill directly impacts their mandate. They'll be intensely discussing how these policies affect inflation and employment. There could be increased pressure on them to adjust interest rates if inflation really starts to pick up because of this.
Puts them in a tough spot.
A very tough spot. Tolerate higher inflation or risk choking off growth with rate hikes. Not an easy call.
All right. For our informed listener then, what are some actionable strategies? Given this new landscape, how can someone navigate potential volatility or spot opportunities?
Okay, if the main concern is volatility or inflation, there are a few hedging ideas to think about. First, maybe short-duration treasury notes.
Short-duration treasuries. How do they help? Exactly.
Well, if interest rates rise, which could happen with inflation, or just more government borrowing short-duration notes offer some protection, their prices fluctuate less than longer-term bonds when rates change. Relatively safer in that kind of environment.
Makes sense. What about specific stock sectors? Anything defensive?
You could look at rotating into something like XLU, the utilities sector ETF. Utilities are often seen as defensive. People still need electricity, even in a downturn. They tend to be less volatile, stable cash flows. Might appeal if things get rocky.
Okay. And the classic hedge. Against inflation or maybe a weaker dollar.
Precious metals. Gold is the traditional go-to. It often does well when inflation heats up or the dollar weakens, both plausible scenarios given the debt increase and stimulus effects.
Okay, those are some hedging ideas. Now, what about opportunities? Based on where the money is actually flowing in this bill.
Right. Based on the direct allocations and policy shifts, you can definitely screen for potential winners. The bill practically points you towards them.
Like those senior consumer staples we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You could screen for companies that get a lot of revenue from seniors. That temporary $6,000 deduction might boost spending on things they buy, pharmaceuticals, healthcare services, maybe certain types of retail or travel.
Okay. What about currency markets? You mentioned potential volatility.
Yeah, if volatility picks up, you might look at high beta FX pairs. Those are currency pairs that tend to move more dramatically when the overall market is choppy. Could offer trading opportunities.
But requires careful analysis, right? Not for the faint of heart.
Definitely not. Requires sharp analysis of global trends and good risk management. High risk, potential high reward.
Got it. And the really obvious winners from the spending, defense.
Absolutely. Focus on firms in missile systems, aircraft production, space defense. That F-15EX production increase, that's direct revenue growth for specific companies. Billions for space systems point to long-term investment themes.
And border security, same logic.
Same logic. Companies making surveillance tech, vehicles, or doing construction for those new CPP facilities. That $5 billion for facilities alone is a huge contract pool for construction and related services firms.
Right. And finally, traditional energy with all the new leasing.
Yes, oil and gas exploration and production companies are worth looking at, especially ones positioned to take advantage of those newly reopened federal leasing areas, Gulf of Mexico, Alaska, those onshore parcels. Significant new acreage up for grabs.
Okay. For listeners who really want to dig into the weeds, check the source material themselves. Where should they look?
Absolutely. Go to the primary source, the full text of H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It's all on congress.gov. That's where every section, every figure is laid out.
Any specific sections to jump to? It's 900 pages, after all.
Good point. For the tax reforms, focus on Title VII. For the Defense Department spending, that's Title II. And for Homeland Security and the border initiatives, look at Title IX.
Title VII for tax, 2 for defense, 9 for border. Got it.
Yeah. And if you want a quick overview first, that Reuters article, Trump Enacts Sweeping Tax and Spending Cuts, gives a pretty good summary and the political context.
Excellent. Okay, we actually had a listener question come in that fits perfectly here. It's on a common point of confusion.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
The question is, does the senior deduction really zero out Social Security tax?
Oh, that's a great question and really important to clarify. The answer is no. The temporary senior deduction does not zero out your Social Security tax.
Okay, so how does it work then if it's not wiping out Social Security tax?
It works by lowering your total taxable income. It's a deduction against your overall income, like the standard deduction.
So it reduces the amount of income that federal income tax is calculated on.
Exactly, which can lower your overall federal tax bill.
Yeah.
But, and this is key, it's not a credit against or an elimination of your Social Security tax liability itself. Those are calculated differently based on your earnings.
Right, and doesn't it have an income limit too? It's not for everyone.
Correct. It phases out for individuals with incomes above $75,000.
$75K.
Yeah. So, to sum up, it reduces the income subject to federal income tax for seniors below that income threshold. It does not directly touch or eliminate your Social Security tax payments. Important distinction.
Very important distinction. Thanks for clarifying that. Well, we hope this deep dive into the One Big Beautiful Bill has given you some valuable insights into its, well, truly sweeping changes and what they might mean for the economy, specific sectors, maybe even your own finances.
And just a reminder, as always, this deep dive is purely for educational and informational purposes. It is definitely not investment advice. Please consult with a qualified financial advisor for your specific needs before making any decisions.
Absolutely. To stay informed on these critical issues and much more, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your deep dives.
And you can join our live Closing Bell stream weekdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time for real-time market analysis and discussion. We dig into this stuff live as it happens.
So as we wrap up today, here's something to think about. How might this long-term redirection of funds shifting massive resources from areas like environmental protection, social safety nets towards defense, and fossil fuel extraction, how might that shape not just our economy, but society itself in the coming decades? Lots to consider there.